power on.
The following is a presentation of the Sovryn Tech Podcast Feed.
The man of tomorrow is here, the Golden Stallion, Savzu, the Rated R radio star, ready to share with you something that I was waiting for the right time. What you have here is my most recent appearance on the Agora Podcast. Now, I have had the great honor of being asked to be on multiple times on the show, and having been on the show multiple times. In fact, I think I still hold the record for amount of times. But, you know, it's become such a thing that Sec and Penguin decided, you know, maybe we should do, you know, turn it into kind of its own sub-series on the Agora Podcast. And they decided to call it Into the Void. In fact, you'll hear in the opening, they do different opening music than they do normally for the Agora Podcast. They actually end up playing a Black Sabbath song off of Masters of Reality, which is Into the Void. Into the Void also happens to be one of my favorite Ace Frehley songs off of Kiss's Psycho Circus album. But regardless of that, it's a series we're going to be doing. You know, I love it. I think it's really cool to, you know, have that music in. Anyway, it's a series we're going to be doing where we're going, you know, I think it's safe to say we'll be exploring a lot of the strange, a lot of the, you know, the bigger ideas, you know, and not so much what, you know, I think the Agora Podcast really concentrates on and does a great job of, which is the practical, the doable, the right now. But, you know, Penguin and Sec are such, you know, brilliant guys. Like, and very well read also. So, you know, there's a lot to get into, you know, when you get minds that have, you know, like dabbled in so many different areas together, that it ends up being a great time. And I just love talking with those guys. And so, you know, I'm happy to do it. And I know we're going to be doing more episodes. We already have subjects, so you'll hear it at the end of this one. Subjects that we already tease. There are also subjects that were teased the last time, the time previous to this one, that I was on the Agora Podcast, particularly where I made a statement that the universe is tripartite. And I will, you know, we'll talk about that in future Into the Voids. But I was holding on putting this in the Sovryn Tech feed. It was a matter of timing. I wanted it to be out either just before or just after, and there was debate on this, but just before the next Prime episode of Sovryn Tech gets released, because much of what gets discussed, especially in like the last 30 minutes of this 2-hour episode, is relevant to what will be in that episode. So it's a bit of a teaser, but I didn't know if I wanted it to be a teaser or if I wanted it to be, you know, like a chaser, right? But I've landed on it being the tease. Now, it's been in the Agora Podcast feed for like a month now, you know, for quite some time. And a lot of you Sovryn Tech listeners also happen to be Agora Podcast listeners, and you went and listened to it there. Of course, I shared it in the Sovryn Tech Discord channel, which you have to be a Sovryn Tech patron, patreon.com/SovrynTech, to be able to, you know, be in on that. But now part of the reason, you know, for this, there are things, again, especially in the last 30 minutes, there are claims that I make that I have never expressly, and I use that word expressly, that I've never expressly stated ever. And that I think, and actually I know because I got the emails, surprised a lot of people. Perhaps even shocked, I think was the term used by some. You know, on claims that I made, or even just on what I believe. But now, here's the rub. Nothing I say here is really anything new. There are, I mean, you know, there's little things I could think of. I mean, maybe some things that you could consider big, like I ended up hating Google, 2 years into the show, as to where before, I was what you could call almost a Google fanboy, right? Okay, things like that changed. As far as like core beliefs and core values and all this, none of that has really changed, since I started Sovryn Tech, 10 years ago. So anything you hear in this that you might find shocking, really, it's always been there in Sovryn Tech. In fact, I could point out where a lot of these statements have been. It's just I've never so explicitly stated some of these things. Okay. And, the only thing that may have changed in the past 10 years is I've just collected more evidence, to be even more confident in my standing on some of these subjects. Now, one of the things, it's a conversation that I've had many times on Sovryn Tech. It's a conversation that has come up many times, on recent Patreon content for Sovryn Tech, the issue of terms, of words, okay? I hate the word spiritual. Hate it. Spirituality, terrible term. Like, I don't like it. And part of the reason I don't like it is it's a big tent term. Way too much shit gets bundled into spirituality. But I end up using a phrase, a term in this episode, which is spiritual technology, or that spirituality is a technology. The irony is that the word technology actually has the opposite problem. Technology itself is by dictionary definition is a big tent term. But technology today, in 2022 and, in much of the 21st century and in the 20th as well, now when you think technology, you instantly think electronics and you think like digital, implementations of technology. That's, and you think computers or smartphones or something like that. When really all technology means by dictionary definition, of course, it can have multiple dictionary definitions, yes. So it's not like it's incorrectly applied, but the initial dictionary definition of the word technology is simply the application of scientific technology for practical purposes. Okay, so technology is not... See, now, because here's another dictionary definition of technology, which is machinery and equipment developed for the application of scientific knowledge. It's interesting, right? Because... it's almost like the term is getting used for the exact opposite of its initial definition. So technology can be the machinery, or it is simply the application of scientific knowledge. It doesn't have anything to do with being machinery, or it doesn't have to anyway. It doesn't have to do anything with equipment. It doesn't have to do anything with computers. It doesn't have to do with anything like that. Technology is simply the application of scientific knowledge. Well, and for practical purposes, but practicality is merely that which can be practiced. So if you consider the Wiccan, the Christian, the Muslim, go down the list of the denomination or the faith or the belief system, okay, when they engage in any form of ritual, and yes, Christians do engage in rituals every fucking Sunday. And if you're an Adventist, it's on Saturday. Prayer is, by dictionary definition, prayer is a technology. Okay. That doesn't mean, now that's not, of course, is there like scientific knowledge behind prayer? That depends. There are people who claim that there is, because the brain is doing weird things, and that is based upon neuroscience. And so maybe it is doing something. You can certainly, all this can be pretty malleable, but you get my point. Is that ritual, that practice, if it is based on, some kind of hypothetical, or at the very least, some kind of scientific, again, what is science? Science is about is getting to predictions, right? It's engaging in experimentation to where you get, predictive results. Okay. Anyway, I think you take my meaning here that technology really can mean so much more than just a computer or something that's electronic. It is simply about again, application of knowledge. Spirituality, on the other hand, is a term that has become way too big tent. Way too big tent. Because there are thinkers, and it's, I don't even think it's a matter of opinion for me, but there are thinkers throughout the 21st, 20th, 19th, 18th, 17th, and I'm sure throughout all time, who were going through the best scientific method of their day. Okay. They might not have had the codified version from Bacon, but you get my point. It's okay. What? So you're saying before Francis Bacon, there was no scientific method? I'm pretty sure Hero of Alexandria made the steam engine through experimentation and, had his own version of whatever the scientific method happened to be. He went through the process regardless. So close the flaps on your assless chaps, slap nuts. Okay. Jeez. Anyway. But there are thinkers, who have gone through that process. And just because, what their conclusions were about did not fit into, certain aspects of Newtonian physics, or because it didn't end up with a computer, or it didn't end up with a television somehow, getting created or something like that, that somehow, what they were studying and came up with, gets labeled as, at its kindest, perhaps, esotericism, at its, at its not so kindest, perhaps mysticism, and in its definition, say, if you were to, look it up on Wikipedia or have it discussed by philosophers, or charlatans, but I repeat myself, they would maybe call it a spirituality. When no, there's nothing about it that is spirituality. Okay. Like it's not spirituality at all. They were processes that went through rigorous experimentation. Just because, again, it doesn't end up with what we today consider technology does not mean that it wasn't in some form or fashion scientific application, or the application of scientific, knowledge gained through a form of the scientific method. So when I say in this episode, again, it's like in the last 30 minutes where we go kind of crazy, or at least I do, and I have fun. So when I say, that spirituality is a technology, what I mean by that is application of scientific knowledge, practically using the human body, but not just like the physical body, but mind body. Right? Or even mind, heart, body, as we've talked about in the past. And the effects of actions by mind, heart, body impressed upon the universe. That's what I mean by that. There is nothing in that statement by me that says there's a sky daddy, that says there's a God, that says that prayer works, that says that blah, blah, see the problem with the word spirituality is when you hear it, you instantly think woo woo. And no one's talking about woo. I'm sure as fuck not. But that does not mean, just because I'm not talking about woo, that does not mean that, processes of thought, observation, physical action, and more can't have some kind of observable, scientifically provable effect upon the universe at large. And I think when we ignore thinkers in the past who have tried to engage in that sort of thing, we do ourselves a great injustice. I love when you listen to this episode, like Sek talks about how, 100 years ago or however many centuries ago, we had no idea what ultraviolet light was. You can't see it. But now we know it's there. It's a spectrum we can't see, but we're well aware of its effects. We know that it has effects and, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Just because it's something we can't see doesn't mean that it's not there and happening. And that is an incredibly key point. Now, in some ways, I'm putting the cart before the horse here because you haven't even heard me yet say what I got a lot of emails about. So I should let you listen to that. But when you hear me say the word spiritual, like that spirituality can be a technology, I wanted you to know exactly what I meant by that. Because I will not be accused of being religious. I will not be accused of being woo-woo or unscientific or, like anything along those lines. Terms like esotericism and mysticism, I don't look at those words with, like I don't look at them in a derogatory fashion. I don't see them as negative, because just like spirituality, far too many practices, far too many thinkers, far too many applications, far too many things have been wrapped up in those terms and get tossed out whole cloth by people who think they are smarter than you. And that's a shame. So I don't shy away from those terms. I also think that, actually the derision for a lot of those terms and the blanket tossing of certain concepts and possibilities and matters of history and ideas and whatever else, getting tossed into that is actually what led to so much of what I consider like the real bullshit in the world, which is, people think, oh, it's fucking aliens, right? It's people from Sirius B coming down to planet Earth or whatever. And, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. And it's like, because they want to run to that because they don't want to get mixed in with, saying, oh, that's spirituality or that's mysticism or that's esotericism. What a pity, Anyway, that could turn into a whole other episode on its own. Okay. But I had this episode you're about to hear, I had a lot of fun with, and we, all three of us did. We had a great time recording it. We had a lot of subjects to get into. We covered a ton of ground, a lot of undeniably scientific ground, and I don't think we really even, again, I hate the word spirituality. Like, I don't think anybody even dalliances with that. The other thing that a lot of people asked me about was, Stallion, at the end there, like Sek said through the use of hallucinogens that he has been to, that he's experienced perhaps other levels of existence, whatever that may be. I don't want to put words in his mouth, or other dimensions or something like that. And then you said, hey, you think you've been there too. Like what's that all about? Well, I'm not going to cover that here. Okay. But I hope when you hear this episode that you are hearing very reasoned people discussing, sometimes some very far out stuff, but it is not coming from an unlearned position. It is not coming from a position of faith. It is not coming, from anything like that. But I think I've said enough at this opening. We'll let this episode just ride itself out and consider it a preview of what's to come in 2022 from Sovryn Tech. So I will leave it at that. I will see all of you on the other side. And have a good time with this one, because we did. Woo!
The Agora Podcast is covered by a BIPCOT no-gov license. Use and reuse is free and encouraged by anyone except governments or their agents. Find out more at bipcot.org.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop.
You were born free, you got fucked out of half of it, and you wave a flag celebrating.
Central authority has just embedded right in it its own problem, and that is that it means a few people make decisions for many people.
Unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
All right, welcome back to the Agora Podcast. This will be part of an ongoing series called Into the Void with our very special guest today, Brian Sovryn. This podcast is your home for agorism, radical decentralization, localism, and anti-authoritarian concepts. If you've been listening to us, you've known we've had Dr. Sovryn on several times in the past. Definitely our most repeat guests. And we really expect to continue delving into some of the most heady and interesting topics that we discuss on the podcast. Sec, why don't you go ahead and introduce us into the conversation so we can get this ball rolling?
Yeah, mostly we're just having Brian back on so he can stay ahead of the curve, or so he's on top in terms of the amount of times he's been on. So Brian's winning right now. He's got a head start.
If you're going to be on the list, be on the top of the list, right?
Right, might as well be on the top of the list, right?
Yeah.
So no, I mean mostly we're continuing some topics that we got into last time we were on, but we ran long, so this is kind of a part 2 to that episode and possibly an ongoing series. But we're gonna get into a couple of topics plus whatever else we feel like, mostly about sort of relating to consciousness and equality and what it is to be a human being, and sort of a meta-analysis of history itself, and whatever else we feel like doing. Actually, one question before we get into like the heady stuff. I know you've answered this several times on other podcasts and on your own. You were just after New Year's here when we're recording this. You have any, I don't know if I want to say predictions, but looking forward to the next year, what do you look forward to, or what are you optimistic about, or what are you nervous about in the coming year?
Yeah, 2022, the year of Soylent Green. What am I optimistic about? Absolutely nothing. No. I am optimistic. I think I actually, and it speaks to what, it sounds like we're going to be talking about quite a bit here. There really seems to be, I know that this word is kind of trite, but there seems to be a real paradigm shift happening, like especially in the matter of metaphysics. And I mean, there's a lot of questioning of theories that have been held for at least 50 years, 60 years. There's a lot of resurgence of theories that were popular 100 and 150 years ago. I mean, and that doesn't have anything really to do with tech, which is what it kind of does, but that's what I usually, am known for talking about. But I'm really loving a lot of the stories that I'm seeing, even in more mainstream media outlets, where there's some, very serious questioning going on right now about like, wait, did the universe, did it come from the Big Bang? Did it come from, XYZ? And I am optimistic about that. In fact, it's almost strange just how popular that is. Now, it might just be because, media outlets like whatever, Popular Mechanics, take your pick, New Scientist, I don't know, and even, going to Yahoo and CNN and everybody else, they might just be looking for clicks. And so when you have like a really far out headline, on Twitter, people are going to wonder what the hell that's all about. So it could be something as simple as that, but I'm going to, be a little optimistic and think that no, people are actually starting to poke holes in a lot of cherished positions that maybe should never have been cherished in the first place. So I feel good about that. That's something that I hope continues into 2022, and it's actually been going on for a good couple of years. I think there's a lot of very healthy skepticism, no pun intended with the health with what I'm about to say. I think there's a lot of healthy skepticism around, frankly, the Western medicine. I'm also actually very, very positive about that, that people are I think there's a subset of people that are very vocal that are just like, well, the science is in, and that's good enough for them, or the research is in and that's good enough for them. Or they constantly exclaim science and put a couple exclamation points on it or something and think they won the day. But I think more so you've got a lot of people who are now, because of the state of the world, after 2020 and 2021, where they're trying to get back in touch with like the source of knowledge, not just knowledge itself, but like, wait, how do we come to these conclusions anyway? And why are certain people considered authorities and why not? And I'm hopeful about that too. So I see a lot of questioning of, again, really it comes down to questioning of authority, and as I've said many times, questioning authority isn't about being right or wrong. It's just about questioning authority. And that's always a good thing. It doesn't matter about right and wrong. And so I really do see that happening. Again, I know when you go online, it feels like everybody's just bought into whatever, the authoritarian line is, but I don't think so. I think there's a lot more people who are really, really questioning a lot of things. So there's my hopes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, actually. I mean, it does seem like there's a really strong technology that we have right now in social media and massive global connectivity is vastly democratizing knowledge, the sharing and distribution of knowledge. And I would counter the experience that you might say where when you go online, it seems that most people are when I experience the different forms of, like, when I experience mass media, certainly it is going to be spreading the information as viewed by authorities and people that gladly accept the views of authority and the authority of itself. But my online media content is very, very, very not only democratized but questioning of authority, almost to the point of, I don't want to say it's always just, it's very anarchic. It's like a epistemologically anarchic experience where the idea of how we can discover what's true and what makes sense. It's people as like atoms just bouncing all over the place with all sorts of ideas, all sorts of questions, arguments, and debates. And it's chaotic, and it's authority means sometimes to some people authority means a lot, to some it means nothing, and to others it means the less than nothing. It means they cast those people as liars and propagandists, and a lot of so the truth is one thing. I mean, truth can vary on perspective too, and then the official and mainstream lines can be, there can be one or a handful of mainstream paradigms, but then when you have this kind of like leveling, this democratization, you've got stuff just flying everywhere. And there's no way to know what. I mean, the vast majority of it is going to be, either crackpot theories or just stuff that's actually in many cases pretty obvious, and in other cases, very little of it's going to be, someone's really cracked the code on whatever, massive global thing is debate is going on next.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and so it's very chaotic. The sorting here is very chaotic, but I think ultimately there is a net good at the end of this tunnel. I think that this process is net not only good but net very good, and we will look at it from where we end up and saying this was a necessary process we had to go through.
Maybe a necessary madness, I like what you're saying, Penguin. I mean, the internet itself as a technology is a very populist technology. It does not lend itself, and this isn't just the algorithms, the hardware itself the concept itself does not lend well to nuance. But that's actually, for me, I think that's become the good thing. This is that questioning of authority. is people are realizing it doesn't lend well to nuance. And when they get in the real world, they do have nuance. And now they're begging for nuance, and like looking out for nuance and wanting more nuance. And they're not just, buying into, again, basically slogans, So yeah, it's chaotic. It's a populist medium. The algorithms like to look at the extremes, and point you at the extremes in either direction. But because people are realizing that, I think, and so now they're looking for nuance, and nuance is where you find the truth. So what do you got, Zach?
I like the way you put that, because it's a trend that I've been noticing really for decades, but more so in the past couple of years. Yes, it's questioning of authority, which is obviously always good, but it's like a popular shift in questioning of everything. I mean,
yeah,
from cultural norms to, like you said, how we come about knowledge, to narratives and meta narratives, to, hey, wait a minute, why do I need to go into an office for 40 hours a week? There's a lot of that. Hey, maybe this, like, go to work for 30, 40 years, buy a house, have kids. Maybe this isn't necessarily the one true best way to do things. Maybe there's different ways of doing things. Maybe the experts are just humans, and maybe technocracy is not necessarily beneficial for people. Technocracy meaning like ruled by experts in this case. Maybe that this is, maybe they're not, gods. Maybe we as human beings can obtain knowledge ourselves. And, it's the questioning of all of these institutions. And you're right, it's madness. It's messy. It's crazy. And it can be a bit chaotic and hard to navigate. And it has its downsides as well. You get a lot of weird echo chambers and people buying into some craziness as well. But I think I agree with Penguin that it's an overall net positive in that it democratizes information of all things back to the people rather than sort of institutions and authorities. So I agree. I'm also optimistic for that reason.
Yeah, well, in this kind of new paradigms, the authorities aren't replaced by new authorities. It's not like a decentralization of authority where maybe more specialized authorities or something are replacing the old, fewer authorities. Back when, example, there were 3, news networks. There were so number of magazines that people read, like Newsweek and Time and whatever, and people got their information. There's so many, the newspapers of records, the New York Times and Washington, whatever. I'm not just talking about that. So there's no replacing of the traditional of authorities in the traditional sense, authoritative, providers of information and truth, whatsoever. So when I say it's anarchic, I mean it. I don't mean it in like the anarchist sense. I mean it in the way you describe systems. It's completely anarchic. It's just everything's bouncing off of everything, with no inherent way to gauge what makes sense and what's true. And yeah, it can be very, very difficult to navigate. I just think that we end up, it's the way we transition, I think, from one environment to where we fully realize this kind of global interconnectivity and having all this information at our fingertips. And there's certainly a backlash to people who, amongst people who do, I suppose, more like align with traditional authority figures. And I don't think there's very few people besides people in the actual establishment that totally buy, because there's authority is already massively decentralized compared to how it was in the past. But we're talking about total anarchy of information here. And I think there's a lot of resistance and pushback, and it is a scary idea to have no way for the people around you to be guided towards any semblance of like common understandings of what's real and what's true and what advice to follow at all, to understand, to view like world events or history, and to have no common ground with the person that's like standing next to you in the checkout line at the the supermarket or wherever you are, filling up at the gas pump next to you. Like, what is the reality that's going on in your state capital or in some foreign country, some border conflict? There's no need for there to be a common like reference point to anything that's going on between like the medical, political, medical news in the world we live in now with COVID and everything, or with anything, any sort of world event or anything. And so to live in that environment, especially to live as a person who's actually like interacting with other people in that environment, is more unsettling, and more unsettling for some people than others. But like, I'd rather it be that way than a concentration of authority and a bunch of people obviously agreeing to the same things in unison.
Sure. Sec, you got something?
No, I just wanted to. This was a great point to use the term. It's distributed. You keep using anarchic. Knowledge is becoming more distributed. It's a distributed network of information. And
but I wanted to capture also the chaoticness of it. But yes, sure. It's also distributed.
That kind of comes with that because it's lots of small points as opposed to a centralized.
Right, distributed doesn't allow for control, and that's what we're running into. Is that
there's a lot of entropy involved too? But I was trying to capture that. Yeah. Okay.
Right. No, I agree with what you're saying, but Giles Deleuze would call this rhizomatic. Mm-hmm. So what that means is rhizomes. Yeah, exactly. Most people thought of knowledge and metaphysics and how we think about things as a culture and how we obtain information as more of a tree. So if you think of a tree as a centralized stalk or trunk with lots of branches coming off of it in different, slightly different directions, but it's all married to that one trunk. Whereas a rhizome grows like a small pod, basically, and there is no central trunk. Lots of plants grow this way, where it grows a small pod, and then it branches off, re-roots, grows another pod, branches off in different directions, grows another pod, and it's more of it's one way of describing distributed network of information. It's just sort of a what do you call that? Painting a picture of how to kind of think of that thing. Mm-hmm. And that's how Deleuze would think of how we actually find information. It's more rhizomatic than based on any kind of foundation. But so one are you going to say something before I interrupted you?
No, go for it.
So one narrative that I think I'm glad to see being questioned is like the narrative of history that's commonly put forth by and this is the like sort of the fruit of the Enlightenment era and also the progressive era, is that history is a linear progression, and we are at the present always at the pinnacle of human development. So we necessarily know and are smarter than every human that's come before us. And this is one of those narratives that I was talking about that's sort of also being questioned in a lot of different ways, is that just because we are further along does not necessarily mean that we are better or more advanced or we've got it all figured out. Everybody every generation thinks they've got it all figured out, and we are the best humans that have ever existed. And look at us, and look at those savages that came before us. And what do you think about that? Do you think of time as like a linear progression, or do you think of it more cyclical?
So I think you're totally right about that. And because this is so I'm 40, so I guess I haven't been around as long as some, but this is the first time I can really think, and I do know this because I know my whole life I've been, chastised for being into things that were, either before my time or just at the start of it. I feel like right now in the 2020s, this is the first time where like the younger people are genuinely looking back to like, say, the 1980s and thinking, wow, that was an amazing time. And it's not just because like, there's economists, like he has a funny name, Harry Dent, but there's economists who talk about like that there's these like generational economical shifts. And the idea that like the fashion industry will bring back every 30 years, that like in the 90s, they brought back the 60s, in the aughts, they brought back the 70s and so on. But it's more than that. Like there is just this massive, like where you can talk to them and they look back. Yeah, maybe they still want their smartphones, but they look back at like, say, the 1980s and they go, holy shit, that's amazing. How could a time like that even exist? In fact, a lot of people like don't understand how that could possibly exist. So this is, and there are I think a lot of statistics anyways, as much as you want to take, value in those, that suggest that we are in a period of time where things are like objectively getting worse, like by the numbers. And it's not just because of COVID. It was happening before COVID, that, whatever, people are making either less money or, by percentage or, whatever else. So clearly we're not on that forward march. And I think a lot of people realize that, and I'm glad about that. One of the things that was a major part of that narrative, that we are always on a forward march, that we're always improving, was, say, something like, the intelligence quotient, like IQ. IQ tests are now heavily debated, if not outright thrown out, in most institutions where they could matter, and by most people. And I couldn't be happier about that, because I think the concept of IQ is bullshit. That's one of the big things. And I think that was created out of progressive era aims to really, it was just all about control, and I think it has a strong tie-in with eugenics programs, which are a major part of the progressive era and the progressive movement. So there is an absolute lie that has happened, and it's not just to me, like I can point fingers at some of just the outright lies, that somehow people 2000 years ago were stupid and we're smart, and we weren't smart until like 1910 or something like that. Like nobody was smart until 1910 or whatever era they want to, or, year they want to point at. But there's always this idea that, well, everybody back in time, they were morons or something like this. And I think the part of the reasoning for that, which is ironic, just again comes down to that wanting to control people. For example, this is one of my favorite stories. So when Pompeii, the city of Pompeii, that got, covered by a volcano, when that was being excavated, there were lots of, now Pompeii was like a pleasure city. Okay. I mean, like there's hookers and blow essentially everywhere. Right. And it was depicted all over the walls in Pompeii. However, you didn't know that until decades later. Why? Because the archaeologists that were unearthing Pompeii, from its disaster in like the early 20th century, they were literally plastering over the frescoes on the walls if the fresco was showing people having sex, because that did not fit the narrative of Western civilization in the early 20th century. Like, no. The Romans were austere. They were this, they were that. I mean, you have Italian museums that literally had locked rooms full of, and they had these things for hundreds of years, full of art, like where, and I'm not kidding, where like a guy is sucking off a goat. Like it's a sculpture. Okay. And that was just so insensitive. They knew it, they had it, but they had to lock it away, even though they could show off all these other things. And not that I want to see that either, but like it was there, but they didn't, the establishment as it was didn't want you to see these things. Okay. They don't want you to know. So there is provably a cover-up of history, and maybe whatever the attitudes and platitudes and what the culture may have actually been like in the past. And I think that this narrative that somehow we're smarter now, we're better off now, and always pushing that narrative forward is something that helps the authoritarians. It's something that they like to, keep in their pocket and have ready. And that's a shame because, again, it leads to a lot of lies. And especially when, we live in a civilization now where certainly, like even in America, where a lot of alternative lifestyles, or what would get penned as alternative lifestyles, we really should just call them lifestyles, but alternative lifestyles compared to what conservatives or even progressives of the 20th century, which were very conservative themselves, wouldn't have approved of, they're accepted now. And I think that's fantastic. But they could have been accepted so much sooner if we just realized that humans had always done this. But we kept getting told, no, men didn't lay with men. Women didn't lay with women. This and this didn't happen, But now we know that's all lies. And it does lend one to, wonder what other parts of history are absolute lies, and we do get rewrites of this narrative, right? Because you have what's called the Great Wall of History, which is generally anywhere between, 10,000 BCE to 6,000 BCE, somewhere in there, where, okay, before that time frame, we just have no idea what humans were doing. We have like the city of Uruk, or, we have the Ugrat culture and, all these things. But before that, nobody knows, but then we go to Turkey and you unearth Göbekli Tepe, which is this entire temple structure, very intricate. That was oddly, it was actually buried on purpose, but it's from at least 12,000 years ago. So it goes beyond that wall of history. And so that wall of history itself is clearly a fictional construct by, whoever wanted to make it that. I think a lot of people find it easy to blame the Christians or blame whoever, because they want to keep their little creation story alive, or, I don't know. But the bottom line being is that the victors, the people who have been in power, have a lot of reasons to keep this narrative going that, okay, back then we were primitive and now we're better off. And they really don't want to lose that. They don't want you to look too closely at what was happening, 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago and beyond. Anybody got anything on that?
Yeah, I just want to, you're making an incredibly important point that I want to elaborate a little bit on and put a different way.
Sure.
So historians, archaeologists, and I would say even scientists, generally speaking, are always affected by the culture that they live in. And they're always, more often than not, they're going to attempt to justify the current institutions and the current status quo, and more often than not serve power and authority itself.
Sure, the Hutsis and the Tutsis.
Yeah, it sounds weird because, like, how can you serve power through like archaeology? Isn't it just but no, you create a narrative around what the facts that you find. And that narrative is what is generally affected by the culture and the institutions that surround you. So, like you said, going back to finding Roman frescoes in not Vesuvius, Pompeii, the culture at the time was very puritanical,
right? And
the Anglo-Saxons believed that they were the superior race to all others, and blah, blah. So therefore, whatever they thought about sex was the right way to think about sex. So if we found things that contradicted that narrative in history, we can't let anybody see that. And like you said, it generally serves power in that. This is true going back to the start of the early city states, where you had narratives about what the people, the heathens, what the people in the heath, the woods, what the barbarians were doing. And they came up with these wild stories about, oh my God, they're eating babies and all this kind of crazy stuff when, these barbarians were just people too, that just lived outside of the city state. But the ruling class of these city states had to come up with a narrative as to why they were superior. And this is not any different now. And this was not any different in the 20th century. And I think during the Enlightenment era, and then during the Progressive era, it kind of went into hyperdrive in that they were obsessed with putting humans into very neat little boxes.
Yes.
Both in the present and in the past and in distant, the distant past. So they needed these very neat little boxes and categories to put humans in, a taxonomy, and it was a means of control. But I think even I'll give the progressives a little bit of, if I'm being charitable, I think they were trying to better. They thought they were trying to better humanity. So if they thought they could figure out what it meant to be human and blah, 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 that they could help lift up the people that didn't fit in those categories, So it's not like they were like evil. It was, it's the tyranny for your own good kind of a thing.
I agree with that. Like, I think, even like the book, even though it might have some problems, like The Creature from Jekyll Island, right? By G. Edward Griffin. He makes it very clear in that like the people that set up the Federal Reserve, they were high-minded people. They thought they were doing a good thing. He didn't think they were evil, like it might have ended up creating an evil institution as we would define it. But I mean, even like Margaret Sanger and I've read her stuff. I just don't take it on. I just don't take it on faith by, some other libertarian that she was some like grand evil person. I mean, you read her stuff and you go, okay, yeah, well, I don't agree here, but I see you're really trying to like lift, humanity up in general. Sure.
Yeah. And that honestly, that to me is that's almost worse to me sometimes than just the overt shitty human being.
Yeah.
So I mean, implicit in that is that because I'm a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, that I know what's best for you.
Right.
Talking about Margaret Sanger, so like be the way, and in the way I live and the way the people like me live is the superior way to live. So therefore we must lift you up. It's that paternalistic sort of racism that is, to me, that's almost worse than like overt, like, I don't know, conservative racism.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And that idea of like cultural supremacy obviously has always been around in some form, but I think the kind that you're talking about that came to rise in the progressive era, whether it's not really it's lost its overt, that's what I was looking for. It lost its overt connection to that kind of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Northeastern liberal elite kind of connotation, but it never really went away. And I think we are still living with that kind of progressivist bent of, the experts kind of do know how best to sort out and plan out things, society and economic arrangements, and who knows what, who's able to do what, and who is given control of how much for the overall betterment of society, and in which lifestyles and beliefs even are preferable. And I think that left an indelible and just like really just it left its mark on our culture, and it hasn't gone away. That's that basic idea of technocratic, not only technocratic control, but like that almost cultural authoritarianism.
Yeah, well, I think you're totally right, Penguin, that it hasn't gone away. And this is what bothers me with, a lot of real pushes, especially right now, by whatever authoritarian structure or domination structure we want to talk about, whether it's in government, corporations, or, you name it, or, really they're in the same bed. And And because a lot of the big talk right now is like the metaverse, right? Or a lot of people are big on concepts of transhumanism and things like this. And because this strain that we're talking about here still exists, this paternalism, right? It makes it very difficult for me to, trust any of these technologies or any of these ideas that, that people have, because it's not like coming from, from the ground up. It's coming top down. And I never trust anything that comes from that direction. There's because it's someone else planning. It's someone else thinking they know what's best for me. The fortunate thing is, probably the company that's spearheading the most, maybe not so much transhumanism, but at least this concept of the metaverse, which what they're pushing really isn't the metaverse, even though they put it in their name, would be Facebook, which is now called Meta. And it's amazing, kind of earlier how we were talking about how like there's this like knowledge or chaos of knowledge that's happening and this questioning of authority. I actually find it really hopeful that most people, if you ask them, do you think Facebook /Zuckerberg /Meta is a good company or a good person? Unless you actually work for Facebook, you get universal no's. Like everybody just says no. Like that guy's an ass. It's amazing how many people just completely recognize that. And so that has me feeling good about it. But the problem is that the people seem to still get a little excited about some of this, some of this more transhumanist or, metaverse style technology. They just don't want Facebook to do it, which I guess I'm glad for that. But, we're really talking about here a lot. I mean, there's a lot we're talking about, but overall, how we, like there's ideas like I brought up IQ earlier where, like that's now, basically getting tossed out the door saying, no, that's not true. But that was widely accepted science, even just up until, a decade or two ago, and was, considered fact, at least in Western civilization for, at least probably 150 years or so. 120 maybe. And no one's learning it sadly, the people that want to push these ideas and like these new ways of living, let's lift everybody up, right? The people that want to push this on everyone, I don't think they've learned the lesson that, hey, we were wrong before. Let's make sure we're really right this time. Kind of like the Megadeth song, where was it Peace Sells? Like if there's a new way, I'll be the first in line, but it better be right this time.
Let's get it right this time. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's wanting to get it right. Like they're just like, okay, what gives us growth and what, I don't know, what pleases the investors, whatever their incentives are. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I can guess, but what do you got?
Yeah. So I grew up in a household that my parents were always ranting about the transhumanists, the technocracy, and they're very very into conspiracies. So
sure,
that was like my background, and I was very anti-transhumanism, anti-technocracy, and skeptical of technology in general.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, I never really sat down and thought about like, what don't I like about transhumanism? And I had somebody ask me, it's like, well, like, are you against people augmenting their bodies in some way? And I had to really think about it to where it was like, no, it's like you said, I'm not necessarily against that. That wouldn't be for me, but I'm against this. I'm against it in our current context where we live under this sort of top-down rule by these elite class who have all this intellectual property on all this technology that is used to control human beings rather than uplift human beings or to provide ourselves with autonomy. So if like we're in a different scenario, I may not have such a problem with trans. I still would. I wouldn't be for me. It would not be a choice I would make, but I wouldn't necessarily be so against it if we lived in some sort of anarchist community. Like if you were creating body mods or something, like I would, in an anarchist setting, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Right.
But I don't trust Zuckerberg. I don't trust any of these tech companies. I don't trust any of this like ruling class of the world, and I don't trust this top-down system of control. This system ruins everything that could even be potentially good. It's always going to serve power rather than serve us, whatever it is. Whether it's, even if it's something good like feeding the poor or, protecting the environment or, getting more sustainable ecology and all of these things, it takes those things and it twists them and perverts them to to serve the system of power that we live under. So, even if transhumanism could be good under the system that we live in, it's going to serve as a system of control.
Yeah. So for transhumanism, I think to work, there's two things that are necessary. One of them is anarchism. One of them is like, you cannot have masters. You can't have domination structures. And the other part is it has to be open source. Now, the reason I say that is, and I, these are words that I can't believe I'd say. I agree with the Pope in that, Catholicism is, under its papal structure, is completely against transhumanism. There's an irony in that, and I'll bring it up in a second. But they're against transhumanism because they are concerned. Well, A, they don't think you can improve a human, only God can. But B, they're concerned of what's called, infrahumanism, meaning that you will create an us and them. There is you will essentially when you start, making I don't know, it could be even be what Elon Musk is doing with his Neuralink or something. You could get to a point where you could say, well, only people with a Neuralink are human. Or only people perhaps, and I wish they would have taken this logic this far, but they didn't. Maybe only people with a vaccine are human. Everybody else needs to get locked up like an animal. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church didn't take it to that conclusion, but that's not exactly here or there. So the reason that it has to be anarchism that transhumanism comes under is because that would keep an authoritarian organization from engaging in infrahumanism. We're saying where they get to define who's human, and thus this person gets rights because they meet this criteria, whether it's a neural add-on, so that they can be connected to the central computer of government or whatever. I don't know, what it would be. And I don't think we're ever going to have an entirely anarchist planet. So that's a problem for transhumanism. And B, there's very few people out there, especially with any kind of means or money, which is what makes the present civilization go round and round, that are funding open source projects for, transhumanism. So I can't, myself, I also wouldn't agree with it for a million reasons, that have nothing to do with anarchism or open source. But, without those things, nobody should be on board with this. But I don't think anybody's thinking about it that well. I think most people are just thinking, wow, can I look up this gal's number instantly in my head without having to ask her so I can stalk her? I really think a lot of people think that way. And that's why they're all hot and bothered about, having information directly beamed into their eyes. With some new version of Google Glass or something, which Google's working on now. But very concerned about this trend because people do overall seem to be pretty positive about it. About transhumanism, in a more abstract nature, which again, I don't think they should be, I'd love to try and go ahead.
No, I think you're seeing I share those concerns that you're going to create almost a two-tiered caste system of either superhumans and humans or human and non-human. So if you have not uploaded yourself into a machine, then you're a lesser being, right? So but I'm seeing a divergence of either people are very positive about this, or they're running away and living in a cabin in the woods.
Yep.
And maybe this is what the people in power want, is sort of that divergence of humans splitting off into almost two separate species at that point. But I think I'm more optimistic than you are. Like, yes, a lot of people are just going to go along with this, but there's a lot of people that are like, oh, like just walking away from this system for a lot of other reasons. Even if they're not necessarily anarchists, they're just like, this is gross. I don't need ads like uploaded into my brain. Thanks. Okay. I'm going to go start a garden and raise chickens and dogs or whatever and play with my kids. You know? So you're seeing a lot of this, and you're seeing like weird cultural phenomenon like solar punk and cottagecore kind of stuff that is, in my view, like a resistance to this system that we're seeing, this march towards like an ever growing technological society, with transhumanism being sort of the pinnacle of that. But here's the thing. So we talked last time when you were on that the end goal of these elites would be to merge their consciousness with machines or AI, or implant AI into their own brains somehow. And we were skeptical about even the possibility of that, because we don't know what consciousness is. But here's another question: like, what does it mean to be a human? Like, is it, when you're more machine than man, at what point does at what point do you stop being human, Brian? Is that the goal to sort of end humanity and move on to something else? Oh
boy. there's a lot in that sec. Okay, so sorry, I hate to make noises. It's just like, man, there's so much to say right there. What does it mean to be human? So this is where we get into, I mean, the number one point to get to about, to be against transhumanism is like, okay, look, we don't understand consciousness. How do you know, like, uploading your memory engrams or whatever, or your RNA, or I don't know, and putting that onto a hard drive? How do you know that is going to be a replication of you? And also, let's be very clear, it's just a replication of you. Like, it's not you. It can't be you, right? Because it's like you didn't mystically transfer anything. You just like copied. You made a copy, so it's always a copy. But so I think the instant that like your thoughts, like you kill off your body, whether it's transferring your brain away, or even if enough of your, this gets into that. I mean, even if you remove enough of your body parts and replace them with other things, there is a point where, I think you're, kind of the old Darth Vader thing, like Obi-Wan said, he's more machine now than man. And I can't really say at what point you are no longer a human, like what organic matter has to be taken away from you to where you're no longer a human being. And really, I don't even want to be in the position necessarily to say that. However, I do want to be in the position to say that if you think just like that you are your thoughts, your consciousness, or whatever that resides in your brain, I would severely question that assumption. And it is just an assumption, because we don't know. The hard problem of consciousness is just that. One of the beautiful things that's, I was talking earlier, how like a lot of ideas from, even 100, 200 years ago are making a comeback, because people are like, things are fucked up right now. I think maybe we got the last 50 years wrong. And so they're looking back and revisiting older scientific theories. And they are scientific theories, 100%, done by real scientists of the time. One of those things is panpsychism. Panpsychism is, essentially this idea that consciousness itself is not, I mean, we could get into, there's also different versions of panpsychism, but we'll stick with one here. I'll try to, define it as best I can. Panpsychism is this idea that consciousness is actually in everything. It's just that in some things it's concentrated harder. And they measure this, much like a particle, much like energy, where they call it phi. And the idea is that, well, a human being, can collect just so much more consciousness for whatever reason than anybody else. Now, let's say panpsychism, and again, this is getting revisited now by serious scientists in serious academic, establishments. Not that for me to believe it, I'd need that. Like, that's not a requirement for me, but let's be clear that it's there if it's a requirement for someone else. This idea, I think, is incredibly intriguing. It does solve a lot of the hard problems of consciousness. I think there are other things that we think of as part of the human experience that also happen to be, are akin to gravity. Like phi would be akin to gravity. Like if there's, like gravitons or whatever, like phi would be, something in that order. I think love is actually something, and I'm not the only one. I mean, Buckminster Fuller, one of the most brilliant humans to ever walk the earth, made it very clear that he thought love was a force like gravity. He didn't think it was necessarily something. Yes, it's something that you feel, but it's also something that objectively existed outside of you. Like it was a field, just like gravity. And this idea that some of these parts of the human experience are something that actually exist outside of you and maybe just concentrate within you, like your body is a receiver, is incredibly intriguing. It's turning everything we've thought, really, I think, or that most of mainstream science had thought for the past 100, 150 years, really on its head. And it's worth doing that because I think people are absolutely right when they say, yeah, things are pretty fucked up right now. Let's try questioning it all over again, and see what happens when we go back to square one based on the truths that we have gleaned, from the past 150 years worth of science and scientific research and medical research. So when you get to, something like that, you do have to debate, like, okay, because everybody's, especially transhumanists, are looking at, well, what's human? Human is the consciousness that sits inside the brain. But with panpsychism, that may not be so. And I brought this up in the last episode that I was on with you guys, that I think, that the brain actually serves your nerve endings and not the other way around, as to where most people think it's the other way around, that like everything is sitting in your brain. Yeah, I don't see that. And we actually have, cases in the past where like somebody would lose a leg or lose so much of their body and their attitude changes. Now you could say that that's trauma and things like that, but what if it's further? What if it's, like that your consciousness, what makes you who you are is your nerve endings in your leg, like that your whole body comprises, like a superorganism in a brain. I mean, another thing that's been very popular as late is just how much of the way that you think is controlled by your gut bacteria. I mean, now this is 20 years ago, nobody would have had any clue. Like nobody knew that this was a thing that's going on. Now we know, like that our gut bacteria has so much to do with our mood, has so much to do, with what we would generally call our mentality.
They call it the second brain.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, you got it, Sec. You're totally right. And so what happens when you upload, a person's memory into a robot, but then they don't have their gut bacteria anymore? So like you missed a whole other brain, so like,
yeah, that's amazing. The gut bacteria thing, that's amazing. Right. And then I think our idea of I just want to butt in. I think our idea of genetics and how genes are expressed have been shown to be completely different than like the 9th, 10th grade biology. Sure. Simple explanation of Mendel and some beans, but like it's
epigenetics changed everything. You're totally right on
epigenetics. Yes. That's it. Yes, and
the idea changed everything.
The way that genes can be expressed and changed, and I'm not a whole expert on this, but it's so far beyond belief of what we are taught, like in high school, that it's crazy. And like you said, the idea that the gut actually is like Sex said, a second brain. So how you really can't separate consciousness outside of the human body, because it's based on anything and everything, the exposure to light, exposure to every single stimulus, every single small, every single system of the body actually contributes towards our what ultimately ends up being our consciousness. Another example of this is literal rhizomes. So the way a forest functions, you say, oh, it's a collection of trees and other plants, and there's like mosses and stuff. And then there's obviously animal, the fauna, but it's a collection of different basic plants. But if you actually look at what's going on underground in the forest, all these trees and other plants are all vastly interconnected. The mosses are and lichens stuff are living symbiotically with the trees and other plants. These trees can transfer nutrients between each other, and sick or young trees can have nutrients like rerouted to from the bigger and stronger trees to the smaller ones, and so on. And they can react to trees that fall over and die and whatnot. And how are they able to do this without consciousness or intelligence? How are they even able to perceive things? We're just at the very beginning stages of even being able to understand these things. But
right.
So there's still two levels of this, is that these plants can not only function in ways that we can only just begin to understand, but they function as collective units, as an interconnected ecosystem, and not as individual plants at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Penguin. Yeah, and like the epigenetic thing is a brilliant thing to bring up, because epigenetics is essentially that your genetics are altered by your environment. That statement alone is so revolutionary, that it is altered by your environment. That's essentially saying your body is far more of a receiver than it is a hard drive, right? And because who you are is very much affected by your environment, like what's around you, in so many ways. And that speaks back to, like, if the idea is that consciousness is actually, like a field, a force around you, and like the health of your body might gauge how much of it you can receive. Perhaps the same thing with love. This is, we've brought up language a ton of times, since I've been on. And, I bring this example up often. I mean, when you look at like ancient languages don't, a lot of them anyway, don't talk about emotions as if there's something you're feeling inside. They talk about them as if they are forces outside of you. Like, fortune, happiness, love, all these things they describe as something that your body receives from the environment, from the outside, that it's not something that comes innate, that it's not something from within you. And I think that's very interesting. And I would argue, especially today, that, people 2,000 years ago were actually far more in touch with, they might not have had the best words or the right terms necessarily for everything, but I think that they were far more in touch with what they were and what they had to feel, because they couldn't rely on a doctor to tell them what they were feeling, or they weren't constantly bombarded and distracted by ads and notifications popping up everywhere. And that's the way that they thought of things. I think that's absolutely fascinating, and it's almost like they had an understanding of epigenetics without knowing what epigenetics were. So as far as like what makes you human, I mean, if I were to say, like, there's another conversation to have there too, but as far as, what makes you human, even though, again, I don't want to be the judge. I think it seems pretty clear that your immune system makes you human. Your gut bacteria makes you human. I guess your brain makes you human, and your sensory perceptions make you human. And, your ability to receive, environmental forces to, create genetic effects are what make you human. Essentially, if you don't have a human body, if you're a robot, you're just not, you're not human at all. Like, your body is as important to you as your brain. And again, most transhumanism is just thinking, well, it doesn't matter, everything's in the brain. I mean, even, organizations that are all about like freezing people, and reviving them later, a lot of them will say, well, we really only need to save the head. I can't think of the name of it's not Alcor, it's something like that. But most of their plans are just to save your head, because they think that the only thing that really makes you is your brain. If I was signed up for that, I would say absolutely not. You save my entire body, because I don't think I'm me without all of my nerve endings, and all the 9 billion connections to my brain, like that's not me. And this conversation could go all kinds of places, but also I think it actually gets even worse. And part of the reason I don't even want to judge what makes a person human. I'm a big fan of Rudolf Steiner. Are either of you guys familiar with Rudolf Steiner?
I'm familiar. I haven't read much by him, but
yeah. So this is the guy, probably what you guys are familiar with, Waldorf schools.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay. He created those. Okay. So this guy, born in the 19th century, kind of got popular in the 20th, died in 1925. Did I? Oh, okay. No, I guess we're good. I thought we just lost somebody. Anyway, Rudolf Steiner, he had a lot of different ideas, and a lot of concepts that actually have really come, they've survived to this day, like biodynamic farming and all this stuff. The guy came up with all of these things. I mean, just a really, really brilliant dude. Now he gets into some very esoteric areas and some real mystical stuff, which I think is why a lot of people don't want to talk about him too much. But I'm fine with all that. Anyway, one of his major points that he's brought up, and he wasn't the first one, nor would he be the last, is that really there is no such thing as a human species. We're all so individualistic that we're essentially each individual is essentially their own species. And I think that's totally spot on. Now, I get it that classification makes it easy for us to engage and to help us understand, the world around us with some helpful shorthand. Okay. But that's just it. The concepts of species is really just shorthand. So we don't have to walk around naming everything something individualistic, and we never actually have a thought because we're just so busy giving everything a new name. But I do think he's right on. And I think right now, and I've said this on Sovryn Tech multiple times over the years, I don't think that there's just Homo sapiens. I think that there are there's Homo empathicus, there's Homo, I don't know. Then now actually people who want to be so plugged into the internet, maybe they're Homo interneticus, whatever you want to call them. But in a very real sense, I already think there are a lot of subcategories of humans, which gets into where, that could get into a subject around equality overall. But again, science and all these people that want to live forever and upload their brains and, everything else, none of them are wanting to recognize all of we've been laying out a lot of hard science here, but none of it's being taken into account clearly based on what they want to do. I feel like I've been talking forever. What does anybody got?
No, that was going to be my response. That's why I don't think equality is applicable to humans.
Right.
So it's not, and I'm not coming at this from some sort of social Darwinist, inequality is good, sort of neo-reactionary. I celebrate the individuality of each human, and I value that in humanity.
Yes.
And so if each individual is each person is their own individual, different and separate from everyone else, with their own set of preferences and values, by what metric do you measure humans as being equal? And some might say, well, material conditions, or you could measure that, or yeah, we're just all human, but okay, but sure, but that doesn't really tell us much either. Mm-hmm. And even going back to wanting the equality of material conditions or even rights. I'm not necessarily a fan of the concept of rights, but you're assuming that each person values the same things you do. So whatever metric you pick to measure equality amongst humans, you're assuming that all other humans value that same metric. So if I think that everyone should have something closer to equality of material conditions, you're assuming that all of those people want that. Some people value me in my younger years, I valued money and working all the time and making money for my family and having all the things that we wanted at a house, all of these things. I worked all the fucking time and I was not very happy. Now at this point in my life, I try to make more time for other things other than making money because I value experience and relaxing and having leisure time and seeing my kids grow up and that kind of thing. So like even me, I say all that just to say that like even me, what I valued at a certain time changed with time in my own experiences. So there, like all of these things are very fluid and individualistic to where I don't believe there is any metric that we can measure human beings to say that we are like equal. And I'm not saying that we are unequal. I just don't think it's something that applies to humans. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, everybody is, I think a lot of people sweat a little when someone talks like that, like you were saying, Sec, because I think that ultimately comes down to then what is a person allowed to do? And it becomes a might is right situation, right? Because it becomes a matter of, well, what is the individual capable of? And I think that scares people, when they consider that, I think people like to believe in a fiction that, well, there is like this concept of rights that applies to every human being. And so I am safe amongst my people, and they create this in-group, out-group situation. And I understand where like that fear comes from. And it comes from, I think, a general need for justice, and for respect, and I get that. But again, that also leads to like a darker side where you're creating a standard of what existence is. And then if someone falls out of that standard and it falls out of a way that you consider to be negative, then ironically, you end up taking away the very thing that you're worried of losing, which is, that person's life. And it's all very, very like circular logic. I don't even think it's logic, but it's all very circular thinking. It's a vicious circle. But yeah, like the idea of equality. I mean, we can say we want everybody to be treated the same. That has the, I think if there's one thing that could define, I don't think it defines humanity, but it defines a certain type of creature, is its ability to act outside of instinct, its ability to, ironically, cope with pain or pleasure in ways that aren't an instinctual pull away. Okay. And this is what I would call sapience. Is that you have the ability to choose how you are going to react to certain stimuli. It's abundantly clear that not everything, and not just even creatures, that not everything on Earth is capable of that feat. Okay, like they're not capable of doing something outside of essentially their biological programming. And that's where maybe you could create a certain line of, okay, this person gets treated in this way, where you could try to come up with that line. And, I mean, beyond that, it's another thing where we could get into some very like weird areas, because what is the property that gives certain creatures, like either humans, maybe dolphins and elephants as well, right? Because elephants, experience PTSD. That's not something that, you would expect an amoeba, right, to go through, so what's the confluence? What's the emergent properties that allows for, some kind of animal or something to, to be able to do that? That's a conversation certainly that could be gotten into, but again, if we wanted to create like a line of what is, what's human, what's not, I don't think you could do what's human and what's not, but you could get into what's sapient and what's not, what is capable of acting outside of instinct and what isn't. Any thoughts on what I just said?
No, I would agree. And I would add cephalopods.
Yes. Cephalopods, covids, not COVID, corvids. Sorry.
Oh, right. Yeah. So, and that kind of goes back to like sort of the hubris of humanity, is that we thought we were so much more superior to all the animals. And it turns out, like, as time goes on, and like you said, with the elephants, they're way more intelligent than we thought they were. The
Yes.
crows. I mean, even orcas and dolphins are they have their own languages and culture and all,
Right.
all the things that we would have previously just defined as human, as a human trait. So, so then that leads us to okay, if human is sapient, and I know you weren't saying this, but if human means a sapient being, well, there's a whole laundry list of things that you would have to define as human now. So then that doesn't make sense either, but you could define a delineating line at sapient and non-sapient. But
right.
I think we're in agreement on equality, though. Yeah. Okay. So if we have a line that we can draw where it's sapient and non-sapient, okay, well, great. So what attributes or what norms do we attribute to being sapient or non-sapient? So where does even equality come into play there? Do we have a standard of behavior for everyone that is sapient? And does that make sense?
Or go ahead.
Oh, no, that was it.
Okay. Yeah. So Murray Rothbard, damned be his name. No. Murray Rothbard would say, well, an animal can have rights when they can ask for it. And now that's nonsense, because like dolphins speak sonopictorially. They don't speak in ways that we do, there's talk about hubris. I mean, there's so much hubris in that assumption, that, well, everything's going to speak language is verbal. No, we know as humans, there's only 10% of human language is verbal. Most of it is body language, right? Which speaks to a whole other thing of what's human. Well, is a robot that can't flinch anymore, is that really human? Anyway, the whole other thing we could go down. But language is not, I don't think, what defines sapience. So we got to make that abundantly clear. Action, it does, I would say, ultimately come down to action. But this gets into where, okay, going through life, perhaps your best, if you want to respect yourself, right? If you want to respect yourself as a sapient creature, the best way to engage the universe and to walk the earth is to, it might be to just assume, most things are either sapient or deserving of respect until they're not, or until they're proven not. Again, what is that proof? Like I said, I mean, how do you gauge on when something is acting outside of instinct? It really does become a huge problem, which is why I think most people like to fall into defining everything by species, right? Because that's so easy to paint by numbers then. It's so easy. Well, that looks like me, so I'm going to treat it the same way. No one wants to take the time to think of things based on their actions. Instead, they really want this whole cloth, this very broad brush, definition of what something is. But again, the universe really doesn't work that way. And well, I don't know where the point of that is. I could really get into a whole other. Well, this is something I've talked about recently on some parts of my show, Sovryn Tech, and this gets into, well, then what's our relationship, to the universe itself, and what is the universe? Is the universe a superorganism? I mean, we can get into some pretty far out ideas. But what do you think on anything that I've said? And totally open to changing direction.
No, so I'm starting to notice this kind of all coincides. No, not coincides. This is all a general trend in the entire conversation, is that we as humans think we know everything. Mm-hmm. Well, not think we know everything. We think we know more than we know. And where was I going with that? So we're not comfortable with not knowing. Most humans are not comfortable with not knowing. I like not knowing, because that's like mystery to the universe, right?
Yeah.
But humans always seem to think that they've got it all figured out. And that's been like the theme of this like entire podcast. It's like, well, because humans look like other humans, therefore we are superior and sapient, whatever. And that was like the way humans thought of things until like recently, and we start finding out that no, actually, all that was fucking wrong. You guys didn't know what you're talking about, but you presented it as if you knew what you're talking about. It's possible that there's a whole lot we don't know, and what you know might be wrong, and we don't know what we don't know. You know, like so like relax. You know, like I'm not saying that this is like a bad thing either. It's just or something to fear. It's just that there's a lot we don't fucking know about reality and even our own planet and the universe, and to like assume that we've got even what we know figured out is has like just harmful consequences and is just the wrong way to think about everything to me. And that is what we've been talking about in this whole conversation, and that is kind of at the root of a lot of the problems we've been discussing, is that humans think they fucking know and they don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
There's certain things we're talking about that might not be able to be known. Do you know what I mean? Like there might not be a way to actually know some of these things.
Or we could know it, but we could never describe it because it is such an indescribable part of existence. You know, it is the ineffable, right? I mean, that's the other possibility too. So we might not know it, or we could know it, but then we could never really share it with each other, or at least not in words and not in textbooks.
Yeah, I think it's very useful, and I think we all share this, the ability to kind of understand and be comfortable with our gaps in knowledge. And I think that comes from a few different places maybe between us, but like we definitely are. I'm the same way. I don't claim to have any knowledge except for that, which I explicitly know. I speculate. I do every heuristic that everybody else does to try to kind of navigate the world. But like we are, you know, I think there's if there's one like very, I don't know, knowledge guided way of navigating life in this world, it's ironically being very comfortable with the fact that there's like immense gaps in your knowledge.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's classic Socrates, you know, the only truth you can know is that you know nothing. Right. I mean, like that was kind of his whole point of wisdom. Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to circle this back a little bit because we're at this stage. And what I wonder is, I'm going to say something kind of wild, and I think it would take too long to lay out the evidence for this here.
Here we go.
Yeah. But so back to transhumanism, you know, again, we really do have a running theme here. Back to some transhumanism. So what is like, what's the driving force? Like clearly the people in power, they, them, those, okay, are interested in this. They want this. In fact, I remember this is still the most shocking damn thing. One of the most shocking things I'd ever heard, where it just made me stop and go, wait, what the fuck was that? I think I was watching an Alex Jones documentary. Now I'm not a fan of Alex Jones, but whatever, he does his shtick. And this was, I guess maybe 10, 11 years ago, he had done this documentary. I mean, he had done so many at the time. And there's a point in it where he says that the elites want their transhumanist bodies so that they can go up to space and live amongst and explore the stars. And he just says that in like one sentence and then just moves on. It starts talking about whatever things the Federal Reserve's doing. And it was such an oddball. It was like totally thrown out there. Gives no explanation, no evidence for why the hell he thinks that, you know, but it was such an oddball thing for him to say very quickly. But at the same time, like when he said that, again, it was very striking. It's kind of like when you read the book of Genesis, where you get to like chapter 6, verse 4 of the book of Genesis in Torah, where it says that, you know, like the Nephilim came down and slept with the daughters of men and all this stuff. And it's like, wait, what the hell's that? You know, like, what are you talking about there? And it's only like one sentence, you know, it's one verse. And it's just one of those like striking things that you wish there was more context around and you don't know. So I can't give a whole lot of context around exactly what I'm going to say here. But what I'm going to say here is that I think the push for transhumanism by the elites is essentially either eternal life or very long life. They know they, them, those, however they figured this out, they know that at one point this was possible, on Earth by creatures that lived on Earth. And if we want to be, again, kind of species about it, we could say, humans or something along those lines. And this is the best way that they can see to achieve that, that longevity or that immortality. And that's their interest for transhumanism. And I mean, that doesn't have to even come from what I just talked about. I think there's lots of people who would want to live forever. And, and they see transhumanism as one goal for that. But anyway, and one of the things I'm pointing at here is what's called the Turin's Kings list from Mesopotamia, from that area. And what it is, it's a list of kings, quite a few of whom were actual
thousands of years, right?
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So there were, these kings that genuinely existed in history. We know they existed, but then there's a list that goes far beyond that wall of history that I talked about earlier. And these kings going further back down the list live, like you said, Sec, for thousands of years. And really it's a history that ends up going back, I don't know, like over 100,000 years with this Turin's Kings list. And I think, based on like some of the cover-ups of history that we also talked about earlier too, like Pompeii and others, I think there's groups, organizations out there that know that humans, may have lived or something, however that all shapes up. And I'm not talking about aliens either, or at least it doesn't have to be aliens. I'll say that because I'm not big on that theory.
No, it's aliens.
Yeah. Right. I'm open to it being another life form, but it's coming from a planet, light years away. I don't know about that, but anyway, so, but there were people who lived thousands of years, and this is not something out of the book of Genesis, where Methuselah lived for 960 years, whatever. This is a completely independent record of this. And it's very, very odd. But I think that there are groups who have been looking at how can we do that? How can we live that long? Frankly, I think the same group has really covered up, a lot of our history of that. Maybe there were civilizations, even beyond Göbekli Tepe, because if you go on a far enough timeline, even a civilization like ours today really would disappear. It could disappear, like on 1 million, 2 million years, every sign of our civilization would essentially be gone.
We would disappear. Our civilization, the evidence for our civilization would disappear faster than even the civilizations in ancient history.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple 100 years, all of our buildings and cities are gone.
Right.
There'd be very little evidence of us ever existing.
Yeah. No, spot on. So I think there's in my opinion, it's an opinion based on research. They do know that at one point this was possible. And I think for a very long time, they've been trying to do that. We talked earlier about the Enlightenment era. Something that was buried about the Enlightenment era was a lot of Isaac Newton's work. Like half of Isaac Newton's work, everybody knows his work on gravity and, Newtonian physics and all that jazz. But the other half, now we kind of know about it because it got revealed eventually. But this guy was a crackpot. Or just doubly brilliant than we give him credit for. And he was abundantly clear that what they were doing in the Enlightenment was they were rediscovering the knowledge of the ancients. Not that they were coming up with new scientific theories. They were rediscovering. That's the way they thought about it. Now, we didn't know that that's the way they thought about it until probably maybe 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. Especially in America, we had no idea that that's the way they thought until we got, our hands on some of their their notebooks would get released or whatever. And then suddenly we go, wow, these guys were pretty, they had some pretty far out ideas, but why did that get kept secret? Is it because, the powers that be, were looking to get the answers, trying to figure out their secrets and trying to figure out, how to get immortality and all these things and rediscover this knowledge of the ancients? I'm entirely open, to that. And I'm entirely open to there being, civilizations that do go that far back. And again, bringing it full circle, I wonder if advanced civilizations, perhaps even of what we would call human, 100,000 years ago or whatever, figured out everything we're talking about right now, meaning, okay, well, we want to respect life, but holy shit, so much is actually alive, or so much is actually sapient, that maybe they decided to just dump this whole concept of industrialization. Maybe they decided to say, you know what, civilization sucks. Let's just go experience life, have fun with our kids, and, and live in tents or something like that. I could completely believe that there was that conscious choice, that they got so intelligent that they realized, yeah, none of this is really worth it. What's good in life are the simple things. What do we got?
Yeah, there's infinite possibilities there. They could have destroyed themselves. They could have followed a completely different level, line of development technologically.
Sure.
But I think what we have to assume, absent any other evidence, is that the reason that we don't have like direct archaeological and so on, tangible evidence of the civilizations past a certain point is because when you look at what there is at the extremes, it's the physical decay. These traces of civilization don't last very long, and what we do have evidence of is only what we have evidence of. The vast majority of everything that's happened in the world, even looking like 500 years ago, the vast majority of what happened, unlike now where every single message could be kept somewhere, every single communication and small event in any place could be recorded, so long as that medium stayed intact. Like the vast majority of what happened just a couple hundred years ago is gone. And 500 years ago, we really don't have a good idea how the average person lived. The average person doesn't have a good idea how the average person back then lived. So 2,000 years ago, what's left is certain parts of certain civilizations where things were built in a very durable way. Right. That they can be excavated, or in Mount Vesuvius erupted and covered that area with ash very, very specifically. Entire cultures and stuff would have existed where they didn't. It could have a nomadic culture. What evidence do you have of that? But like the remnants of that culture that still live nomadically. Certainly no records. Writing when it was recorded on a durable medium that could like be buried usually by accident and then rediscovered somewhere. But if it was written on a soft medium or something, that's gone. Right. And most people didn't write, and most civilizations didn't have really a form of writing. And if they did, it was a very limited form. So, there's physical limitations. Like you said, even if our society ended now, how long would that last, and what sort of evidence would that leave? Well, I think a lot of stuff would leave traces, but those traces aren't an accurate representation of what actually happened or what things are actually like in that present time. It's just what's durable enough and what form it takes after centuries of decay.
Yeah,
so,
we only have hints of history. You're totally right. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
For multiple reasons, but then it's compounded going back that far. So we really don't know. I don't know if it was because of Noah's flood or what it could be. I'm open to anything. We have no idea. I don't know if it was the nuclear cataclysm of was it the Bhagavad Gita or something? I'm not really familiar with those words. But there is just any number of things, including just different civilizational collapses that could have happened, because we're talking about like a much longer period of time than we have from kind of trading back the roots of current civilization to now. Mm-hmm. So there could be many millennia of rise and fall in this case, especially with supposedly very long lifespans. But yeah, it's going to be something that will have been as much of a mystery for us now as it was a mystery for the people, like you said, in like the Renaissance times or in the later early Enlightenment times. But to actually, so much is going to be lost to the physical passage of time, that it is truly something that, if there is any evidence somewhere, it is something that may have been, kept secret for centuries. And I really don't know, because it's so hard to imagine very much surviving from that time. And if something has survived from that time, that may have been something that has been kept kept secret for which is hard to imagine, but kept secret for millennia.
Sure. Sec, what do you got, man? I know you got it. Well, I got about let's do another 15 minutes. How about that?
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So first of all,
you got to have a lot, man. Do it.
I mean, man, I think some of this we might have to save for next time.
Sure.
So, number one, just bouncing off what Penguin said, we do have a lot of evidence that contradicts the narrative that most historians put forth.
Yes.
There's a lot of evidence that the narrative that they put forth about the timeline of history and what happened does not make sense. But going back to what you said, Brian, about the elites seem to want to be immortal, I would say, and this is me saying this as an atheist, I don't believe in, I don't necessarily believe in any kind of higher power. When I meet one, I will, but I believe that they think they're going to unseat God and become God. I think that's how they think about it. And I think that you're right, going back to history where you have this, seems like an abrupt split in the timeline almost, where people lived for 800,000 to a couple thousand years, and then all of a sudden they did not. And I think there's certain people who know more about that than others. I agree.
Yeah.
But I also think that they think that God did that. You see what I mean? So like we all, as humans, all lived for thousands of years, and then God changed that for whatever reason, and then we only live to 50, 100 years.
Right.
So I think certain people want to undo that, and they're attempting to find knowledge and create a system or society where they can do that through machines. That being said, going back to the evidence that the narrative of history is incorrect, you got things like the Bhagavad Gita, you've got that King's List, like you said, but you've got structures that go back, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, that shouldn't exist if the narrative is correct. That they existed, it implies that humans had advanced knowledge prior to the last ice age.
Correct.
And they shouldn't have. We should have been in, the Stone Age. They should not have, because if that structure exists 12,000 years ago, that you can't go from Stone Age living in caves to that. There has to be a progression there, which implies that there is more structures or evidence prior and knowledge prior to that we are unaware of. So now this is just, I have no evidence for this whatsoever, but I'm going to tie in the sort of the consciousness and what we're talking about here. It's possible that civilization has reached those high points several times, going back millennia, going back possibly hundreds of thousands, millions of years. We could have had a rise and fall many, many times that we have no evidence for.
Right.
So, where was I going with that? Like going to the work of like Zachariah Sitchin or Graham Hancock or David Icke, I don't necessarily think that it needs to be. I used to read a lot of those guys, and I don't think aliens is even a necessary or adequate answer, or even the most interesting. What's possibly more interesting to me is that ancient humans could have had far more knowledge about the way things work than we even do now, in the sense that there could be some collective consciousness or alternate dimensions possibly that you could access through with your mind, or all of these things are way more interesting and fascinating to me than even aliens. Like, they could access some other alternates. I don't know if it's a dimension or a reality or sphere or consciousness, like you were talking about before, how we're antennas for consciousness. That would almost imply that consciousness is a thing that exists in some other realm, you know?
Yep.
So it's possible that these ancient humans had far more access to like other realms of existence, other dimensions, even other entities in these other dimensions. And speaking as someone who's done a lot of hallucinogens in my time, I fucking been there. Okay. So
yep.
Like, what do you, okay, I'll turn this back into a question. Do you think it is at all possible that humans were at, I don't even like to use the word as advanced, but advanced in a parallel way to what we are now previously in history, and that, like you said in the Enlightenment thought, that the Enlightenment thinkers thought that they were tapping into what humans already knew a long time ago. I guess that's a question.
All right, so boy, the things you guys pull out of me on this show, because there's been multiple occasions where I've said things on this show I've never said anywhere else, even though I might have been hinting at them for years.
Awesome.
Yeah. Actually, I was, I mean, I've talked about this in the past, but I was actually very good friends with Zecharia Sitchin. I got invited to his funeral in 2010. Frankly, a beautiful man, just a wonderful guy. And, you know, I mean, he'd take forever to tell you a story. So like, you can only imagine what reading his books is like. And I know, cause I read them. Yeah, I mean, he was really hot on what I mentioned earlier about Genesis 6:4. Like, he was really big on that was aliens, you know? And yeah, like his theory that the Anunnaki, or what Genesis would have called Nephilim, that like they spliced in genes that gave us longer lives and then took them away. He was really, really big on that. And he even thinks that one of the like demigods, which is like kind of the half Anunnaki, half human, actually be a princess or like a queen, is we actually have the bones from her, Pinnuabi. And he tried near the end of his life, he tried to get, medical researchers to Iraq to like study the bones, you know, and maybe get some marrow or something and find out if that was true, in what the remains of Pinnuabi. It's really fascinating stuff. And he knew I disagree with him about the aliens, you know, but that doesn't mean that some of the conclusions weren't still spot on. And I think I like what you're saying, Zach, that it's actually far more interesting that it's something else. And I'm with you on that. The idea of other dimensions, the idea of like other planes of consciousness, the idea that humans, can access those through other means, you know, you're going to make me say it. Yeah, I think I've been there too, but not through hallucinogens. So I want to touch on like the eternal life, or on the long life thing. I mean, I think, and I actually hate using the word I think. There's not the word that I want to use, like, because I feel like it's more of personal experience, and maybe it gets into those areas of ineffable that you can, like, that humans can live a really long time if they live in a certain way. And what we were talking about earlier, like with epigenetics, like when you live in a certain environment, when you live, you know, just again, under certain circumstances, that you can live a really long time, and with a certain knowledge and all these other things. And that, yeah, perhaps, I mean, you know, we're so busy thinking that like spirituality, I hate that term, but we'll just run with it because it's what everybody thinks of. Spirituality is in itself a technology. When we think technology, we're thinking digital, we're thinking electrical, right? And I know when you were on the ZomiaONE podcast, Sec, you had a great monologue about this, about what technology can be. Technology can be a lot of things. I think spirituality in itself, is a technology, and it's a technology that can take you places just like rockets. Now, I don't believe in a God. I don't believe in a sky daddy of any kind, so I am, by dictionary definition, I'm an atheist as well. But I do think that there are a lot of texts that are pointing at capabilities of humans having capabilities that are what we might define as godlike. And we're a species with amnesia that has forgotten a lot of these things, or has lost them, or perhaps they got written down, but they were put in code. And that perhaps we can access, maybe it's, something more Kabbalistic, where it's like the tree of life, and, there's these the 10 Sephiroth that you can access and everything. I think your biological body is so capable of so many things. And this speaks to, ultimately, for me, why I'm so terrified, frankly, of transhumanism, is I know that my biological body is part of the key for me to access what's fully accessible in the human existence. Now, is that like the Akashic record, like Edgar Cayce was hot on? Is there a hall of records underneath the Sphinx? Things like this. I don't know. It's interesting because a lot of these ideas like that I'm sharing now, that I've never really talked about and said that I believed in, or thought existed or were possible. A lot of it does come from like Jewish texts, like the Tanakh, like Torah, like the Zohar, and so on. And I think a lot of that stuff's encoded in there. In fact, I think in the Zohar, there's like advanced technology, like, electrical technology, like nuclear technology, that's encoded in there with like the Ancient of Days. There's a great book called The Mana Machine, which I think just blows the lid off that whole idea. These engineers, they're like, their research is so on. I'm not surprised. I think that book is literally buried, because it's been out of print for 40 years. And I think there's a reason why. But anyway, I mean, my answer to your question ultimately is yes. And much of my life really has been trying to explore. I think there was a period in my life where I thought that ultimately computers and technology and the internet and blah, 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 and all this could aid in that quest of, maybe how to live forever, or how to, access, other aspects of the universe, whatever, maybe other realms, other dimensions, however you want to talk about that. But really, like, I'm at the point where I think these things are actually now they're distractions away from being able to do that. And yeah, it's a tough thing to talk about, because we live in a civilization, we live in a society that wants you to quantify, every little experience that you have. And there are experiences I think we can have that you can't quantify them, because they're real, but they're so personal. There's no way that you could quantify these things. Like you can't even put them into language, because they defy both language and logic. So yeah. And again, I do think our ancient ancestors, I think they were well aware of these things. I think they knew it very well. There are odd texts out there that make very odd claims of what, I mean, like in Judaism. So you have a text called the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation, or the book of formation. You have a lot of people who claim that book like teaches you how to create what are called golems, how to create life, like literally from what this text, lays out. But also extrapolations from that text, suggest that humans can live for 1 million years, like literally 1 million years. Which might as well be eternal life, I mean, when you're talking about that kind of timeline. And I think these things are absolutely fascinating, because they're pointing at, I mean, you could say that we only have scraps left, but they are pointing at so much more knowledge that they should not have had. Just like we find out, a couple of years ago, the Babylonians knew equations that we didn't come up with until 300 years ago. Like, how is that possible? And I think a lot of that comes from just being far more aware of the universe around you. And, a lot of times math can be an expression of the ineffable, where language can fail, or where it can fail, because math can be, it is a language in itself. Anyway, I just laid down a ton. What do we got?
Penguin, you got something to add there? I know you're the resident theist, so
Yeah, I'm skeptical of all claims until we have evidence, and we really
sure.
can't have evidence. And that's kind of the actual issue here, is that at some point, if anything did exist before the regenesis of like the modern civilization, literacy rates were so low that the main form of information storage and transmission was oral, and which required, by the way, a completely different structure, neurological structure to be able to be done.
Sure.
I'm very familiar with tons of work that was transmitted through through memory and orally, and the idea, and you can very quickly, if you are either religious or you somehow otherwise familiar with like some of the more ancient cultures with less than current literacy rates, it's amazing that clearly there was different mental paradigms that had to have existed, where people had vast amounts of knowledge stored in their brains that we just simply do not have in our current paradigm. But that's really not the point. The point being is that there's the physical inability for whatever reason for the text to have not been passed down, and then our inability for people to have been literate at that time. But yeah, I'm not really familiar with any of this stuff, so it's I can see where this could be the eternal mystery, but certainly whatever did exist would not have had to have followed anything resembling the developmental history that the current civilization has followed. So it's really the possibilities are just about infinite, and we can only imagine it followed a very different path, especially if any of these more wilder and promising possibilities are true.
Yeah, I won't say that I necessarily believe like any of this, right? Like very few things do I believe. Like believe means that you are fucking damn sure.
Yeah, right.
Right. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure about any of this, but I am open to the possibilities that there's a lot we don't know about the nature of reality, the universe, our own history as human beings. And, back to Penguin, what you said about evidence, it's like, you worship Allah. I mean, is there a ton of evidence that Allah exists? Well, no, but you just know he exists, right? And
yeah, it depends what you call evidence, but yeah.
Okay.
I think the vast majority of history that's happened more recently than what we're talking about is completely lost. Like there's entire civilizations that have not existed, a couple thousands of years ago, not 10,000 years ago. And there are civilizations I know of that there's very little, if any, evidence of, because these records and traces, we just happen to know what we know, and they're remarkable because we found them. But most of what's happened 1,000, but not to mention 2, 3, multiple thousands of years ago, it's completely lost to history, because these things don't leave traces, just as much as our civilization won't leave traces of most things. So I don't know how far we can go back. I mean, from the religious standpoint, maybe we aren't supposed to, but I don't know that that's true either. I don't know if there's any evidence one way or another for that. But either way, I don't think that information necessarily or anything else can transmit that far in history. So what brought us back to kind of a new formation of civilizations that started to occur at the end of I think maybe there's a lot of that was the climactic shift at the end of the Ice Age, but probably honestly what it was
happened every 10,000 years or 10,000 years or 20,000 years throughout human history, to where we're on like this weird 20,000 year cycle.
Everything just keeps resetting,
and it just keeps resetting.
Right.
Go ahead.
All this stuff happened at this point. All the stuff, our current civilization, the track that started this, has been at a very different place climactically, but it's been like a incremental change over time in that cycle that you're talking about. But like when the earliest civilizations that you can kind of draw a rough line down to the modern ones, the early agricultural, like river valleys, city states and whatnot, those things are mostly traceable, I think, to that climactic change. But then again, there's also a horizon of like the archaeological evidence for even these things, the direct archaeological evidence is scant. I mean, I don't know what survives and doesn't become part of the, just reclaimed as part of the earth after some point. So, it might end up being futile to try to discover these things from their original sources. The best thing we can do is, without ever knowing it, kind of just rediscover these things on our own, which I think is what's, if you look at the example of Newton, that's what kind of science has actually probably done. If it existed, we probably rediscovered it independently.
All right, one last thing, and then we really got to let Brian go. But
yeah, it's all right. Go for it.
Sorry, Brian. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I know I laid down like a ton of stuff there. Go for it.
So if anybody listening to this is like, boy, you guys are fucking crazy. And I'm sure there's plenty of those. And trust me. Yeah. But just think of this for a second. Up until fairly recently, we did not know that UV light existed. Mm-hmm. Not that long ago. So that is a spectrum of light that exists outside of our ability to see. And it was only that we became advanced enough that we were able to see or know that UV light exists. And there's a couple other examples of this. Now, if you start getting to like higher math and physics, and I'm not a physicist or a mathematician, but things can exist outside of like our spectrum of being able to observe them. Mm-hmm. And also things can exist outside in a different, what they call a different phase, to where we could, we could not observe them because we are at the exact opposite phase of that, whatever that object or thing is. There's not a word for that. Mm-hmm. So theoretically speaking, just not based on what we know, there could be an entire civilization with entities or beings literally right next to me, but out of phase, so that they're not existing in the same sort of, they're existing in the sort of the same space, but not on the same plane or phase that we are existing in this reality. So see, to me, this is all way more fascinating than fucking aliens. Like,
oh yeah,
the idea that like there could be literally entities sitting like right next to me that we can't observe, that exist in a slightly different phase of reality than our own. That means we will never be able to really observe them through normal means. So
yeah, I mean, just as an example, real quick, the Quran, and I guess the early Arabs at the time would have been familiar with the concept of jinn, and we have this concept that would have been very much kind of what you're describing. But the only jinn that would have been witnessed or described would have been the ones that where there was some slight crossover between
where they revealed
the phases. Right. So yeah, exactly. Maybe that some were able to slightly modify the phases or however that works. But the rest of them, the only ones that would ever have even been able to be perceived would have been the ones that had kind of come into phase or whatever. So I mean, certainly it's attested through not just that culture, but others by different name.
Brian, leave yourself. That was there's the jinn. That's a perfect example of that. But there's lots of other examples throughout history too. But we'll have to leave that for another time. Brian, you want to leave a cliffhanger, bro?
Yeah. Well, I think, I know I put down I know we all put down quite a bit here. I think a lot of that is worth, exploring further. But I think that there are certain collective narratives within groups that point at things where it's like the evidence that exists is just too tantalizing to just throw away because we don't have because we can't quantify it, and I think it's worth looking at. I know we didn't get into, I think we wanted to talk about the Akashic record. We want to talk about all kinds of things. And man, I'm down for talking about more of that. I'm not going to say that I necessarily believe in all of it, but I am down for talking about a lot more than that, because something that's interesting. And here's the cliffhanger. I'll end with this. And Penguin, you can correct me quickly if I'm wrong, but Muhammad, who wrote the Holy Quran, he was essentially illiterate, and yet
it was revealed to him. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But he wrote the Holy Quran. Like, how is that possible? How could somebody who's illiterate, who, there seems to be a lot of historical evidence that says, oh yeah, he wrote this. How did that happen when he couldn't? You know what I mean? And so, was he accessing some further information? In Judaism, the Tanakh, it's laid out very clearly in the Tanakh that it says that the whole book existed before the universe came into being. Now that's a very far out concept to lay out there. So, I think it'd be fun to explore this idea of what if knowledge is like already out there and we're just picking it up, but maybe that's for next time.
No, that was going to be my suggestion. So that'll be our next part in this series for sure. And I would also like to maybe delve into what is the universe itself? Is it finite? Is it like space and time, or is there more to it than that? And what is
it the corona of a fourth dimensional black hole? Yeah.
Yep. Or is it like you said, or is it just like the outer shell of like multiple, sort of a string theory thing, like where it's the outer shell of like multiple competing dimensions that go on infinitely, or is a human just sort of the universe experiencing itself subjectively, like that the human, what is the universe and what is the human's relationship to the universe would be another great next part in this series. So let's try to remember that, and everybody listening, try to remember that.
All right, we're going crazy next time.
Going nuts.
We're going crazier.
I think we already went crazy.
Yeah, we went crazy. Oh yeah.
But Brian, we got to wrap this up, man. We gotta go.
Yeah, sure thing.
Plug your stuff, like whatever you want. And
sure.
What are you working on these days, and what are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2022 is a really big year for my show, Sovryn Tech. We might be exploring more of the topics I just discussed and that I never revealed before, but boy, I know I'm going to get questions about them. So if you want to hear the answers, until we're reconvened with Second Penguin here, just go to SOV, V as in Victor, SOVRYN Tech, TECH.com, SovrynTech.com. And I guarantee a great time this year.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, man. And I love these conversations, and I like picking your brain about this stuff. And I guess we'll see you next time. We'll have to make it soon. We'll squeeze you in earlier rather than later.
Sounds great, guys. Great. Thanks.
All right. See you, brother.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Peace to you.